Edie, we can't hear you.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I am Dee Garcia, and now we're going to continue with our last two parts of our training. We're going to go through part 4, which is application review, amendments, and closing. One comment on there is one requirement on there is public comment requirement. And this is a statutory requirement in ESSA, and I've put the what that requirement is, but it's in ESSA 8306A7. And under general provisions, there is the requirement that before submitting the application, the applicant afforded a reasonable opportunity for public comment on the application and considered such comment. You can also find that requirement in your ESSA provisions and assurances. And again, that is on the SC 5003, where you're assuring your provisions and assurances. And it strictly says by certifying and submitting the e-grants application, the applicant is assuring it is in compliance with all provisions A through Z and assures within the application. And that provision and assurance is letter I. An example of meeting this requirement is a public hearing. The most common public hearing we know about is the board meeting, but LEA should follow its local policies and procedures for obtaining that comment. And those, additionally, the LEA should afford an opportunity for the public to provide the public, any public comment, as well as providing sufficient time for that to happen prior to submission of the application. It is also the LEA's responsibility to maintain those documentation of announcement of the public hearing, any minutes from the hearing, in the event that we should validate that requirement.
Thank you, Dee. The next section, various divisions that do some type of review of the application and approval process. We're going to give you a high-level overview of what that application review and approval processes look like across divisions.
And we're going to start with the Grants Administration Division. Once your application is submitted, it will be assigned to a grant negotiator. That grant negotiator is going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, make sure you've applied for the appropriate amount of funding, make sure that everything you have asked to be everything that you put in your budget is an allowable expense. However, there might be things that need to be changed once the application has been reviewed. What will happen then is that you will receive an email, and when you open up your application, you'll go to Schedule GS 2300, which is Negotiation Comments and Confirmation. And there you should find very clearly outlined instructions. It'll tell you which schedule to go to. It'll tell you what line or area to go to, and it'll tell you exactly what needs to change. Now, once in a while, we'll find that the grantee will put their comments in that gray box below the required change, rather than changing the application itself. We always want you to change the application itself and make changes there, unless there's something we simply needed clarification on. And if that is the case, we'll say, please put this information in the comments section below, or please confirm you understand that this may or may not be allowable in that comments area below. It should be all clearly presented to you what to do. Now, if you have questions about the negotiations you've been asked to complete, you will be provided with the information of how to get back in touch with your negotiator. The email should provide that information for you. You'll also be given a requested revision due date for those changes. We'd like you to get your negotiations back to us in 3 days. That's just so we can keep the process going and so that we can get your notice of grant award to you as soon as possible. And you can start working on your program as soon as possible. Things that say words like as soon as possible rather than a clearly defined date don't get done. So we do define a specific date. If your person who submits applications and works on applications is out of town and you need a week, fine. We still want to identify a date that we can expect to have those negotiations back from you. The negotiation staff is wonderful to deal with. You've never met a more helpful, patient, supportive, and understanding and friendly group of people. If you haven't worked with your negotiator yet, you have that to look forward to. The next slide is about post-award compliance, so I'm going to turn it back over to Nellie.
Thank you, Amy. So within the Federal Fiscal Compliance and Reporting Division, my teammates and I are the post-award compliance unit. We conduct post-award reviews of no-good or awarded federally funded grant applications, with our focus being compliance with statutes, regulations, non-regulatory guidance, and grant guidelines. Our reviews include items that were previously part of Grants Administration's negotiation process, but that are not included in Grants Administration's current streamlined review process. If non-compliance issues are identified in our reviews, you'll be notified by us from the PAC unit, post-award compliance, and we will issue a preliminary report describing all non-compliance issues requiring resolution. If our review identifies an area or areas of non-compliance, the preliminary report will be sent to you outlining the following items. We will offer you technical assistance resources. We will identify the areas of non-compliance within the application. We'll also send an invitation to you to contact us by phone call or Zoom meeting to discuss the required amendment. And finally, we'll send you a deadline to submit the amendment addressing the non-compliance issue or issues so that we can keep these applications moving along. The subrecipient then submits the amendment to address the identified areas of non-compliance. Next slide. Thank you.
Okay, one other area where we do a post-award review is for the Title I Part A campus selection schedule, the SC 5000. The scope of our review includes verifying Title I campus eligibility to be sure that the LEA has followed the rules associated with identifying campuses as eligible for Title I services. We also check to be sure that the campuses that have been marked as school-wide program campuses have met the eligibility requirement for school-wide programs, or that they have the requisite EdFlex waiver or the status of having been school-wide in a previous year. We do checks to ensure that the Title I rank and serve requirements have been followed, and so that the LEA is serving campuses in rank order or having grouped by grade span to be sure that the LEA is serving campuses that they are eligible to be serving. One other area that we do as part of the SC 5000 review, we do a desk review of the supplement not supplant statement of exemption. We verify that if the LEA has indicated that it has a statement of exemption from the SNS methodology requirement for Title I Part A, that the LEA actually does qualify for that exemption. So in any of these cases where we find that the LEA needs to make a correction to the SC 5000, we send an email so that the LEA can draft a revised SC 5000 so that we can ensure that the
that the revisions that the LEA is making will be in compliance with the campus eligibility rules or the statement of exemption rule.
And now we're going to talk about amending the application. When I spoke to you just a moment ago, we were talking about changes that need to be made before your application can be approved and before your notice of grant award can be issued. Now we're going to talk about circumstances that might happen down the road after your notice of grant award has been issued, your grant's been going for a few months, but you find that you need to change your budget. For example, maybe you plan to hire 2 positions, but you couldn't find a person to fill that position until halfway through the grant period. Now you have less money required to be spent in payroll, and maybe you need some more supplies. So you're wondering, is it time to do an amendment, and where do I go to do that? First, you're going to go to your grants page and look on the grants tab under your list of awarded grants. You'll see this on your screen on the left-hand side, the red arrow pointing to the grants tab and the circle around the awarded grants. And you'll go down to the ESSA grant that you want to change. Once you open it, it will open to the table of contents, and then you'll scroll down to the name of the grant. I'm sorry, that's not so much the table of contents as the ADC form and the grant right there. And you will hit the amend button to begin an amendment. Once you open the amendment, you'll complete all the schedules that need to be updated. That would probably be your budget summary. And in the scenario that I just outlined, it would be your payroll page and it would be your supplies page. But you also need to complete the schedule that explains why you're doing the amendment. And I believe that is the next slide. Thank you. If the amendment was required by the post-award compliance unit, you will check the yes. And if not, don't do it. On the amendment justification, keep things basic and simple, such as in the scenario I outlined, we are reducing payroll costs, we are increasing supplies to make it consistent with our needs that have emerged since the grant was submitted. Keep it short, keep it concise, but keep it accurate, because then we're going to go into the application. We, meaning the negotiators, will go into the application to see if what you said you were doing is actually what you did. Before you leave this page, though, you will need to put a check by the confirmation of understanding of stated terms. And this says in that teeny weeny print, applicant understands that an amendment is effective the day it is received by TEA in substantially approvable form. Amendments are subject to negotiation and approval. Then you will certify and submit the amendment. Once in a great while, a grantee will believe they have already submitted an amendment to us just because they've made the changes in the application, they've completed this amendment justification schedule, and they've saved it. That doesn't do it. It also has to be certified and submitted, and it has to be certified and submitted by the authorized official for your district or the person who has been granted permission to submit by the superintendent. Next slide, please. We have provided you with a document called When to Amend the Application. And it opens with 3 statements that will save you so much time, because you will not need to do an amendment if all you're trying to do is budget for indirect costs that were not originally budgeted in your application. Indirect costs can be claimed to your grant whether they have been budgeted or not, as long as you have an approved indirect cost rate. We usually will process these anyway as a courtesy amendment if requested, because we understand that there are grantees who simply want to see it on the budget and have it to use as a reference and know where every dollar is going. But please know that you do not need to submit an amendment to reduce indirect costs, to increase indirect costs, or to claim them when they haven't been claimed. Second, understand that supplies and materials do not require specific approval, but they have to be budgeted in your application in order to be charged to the grant. So it's just a lump sum of money. You don't need to tell us I'm buying 25 pencils and 92 pens and then amend later when it's 76 pencils and 14 pens. Supplies and materials are just a lump sum and no changes need to be made in the application as long as it's in with the dollar amount parameters, which I'll cover in just a little bit. Next. If TEA has completed a budget adjustment on behalf of your LEA, such as when reallocations happen, and carryover happens, you do not need to do anything. We have done it for you. However, we will drop that money in your largest class object code. And if that doesn't work out for you and you would like that money budgeted in a different way, you are free to amend afterward. But simply to claim the carryover funds or the reallocation funds, you do not need to submit an amendment. We'll do that for you, and we'll send you a bulletin to let you know that. Now I'm going to go over the when to amend document, which outlines more reasons to amend in detail. And that would be the next page. Thank you. This is a list of 14 different scenarios, and you will learn whether or not you need to do an amendment by referring to this list. First, please look at the banner across the top of the page. The application change column lists all the different scenarios for possible changes, but then on the right three columns show different types of grant. ESSA is a formula-funded grant. So if you're looking to determine whether or not you need to amend this grant, check the formula-funded grant column. Just for reference, in case your job involves doing other grants, know that you'll be looking in a different column to check and see whether you need to do an amendment for a discretionary competitive grant or for a discretionary non-competitive grant. First scenario, you need to add a class object code not previously budgeted. For example, you had no supplies in your original amendment and now you want some supplies. Yes, you will absolutely need to do an amendment to that. A minimal amount must have been budgeted in a class object code in the originally approved application or subsequently approved amendment for the 25% amendment variance below to apply. And now on number 2, we will address that 25% variance. If you want to increase the amount of funds in currently approved class object codes on the budget summary with the total of all increases being more than 25% of the total award amount, then you will need to amend. And this is one that's a bit misunderstood because it is cumulative. If it's a total of more than 25% of the total award. So if your award is $100,000 and you're planning on moving more than $25,000 around, yes, you will need to amend. Next slide, please. You will notice, if you are super sharp, that numbers 3 and 4 are missing. They are there if you refer to this document on our website. Numbers 3 says if less than 25% of the class object code is being moved around, do I need to amend? The answer would be no. And number 4 says if less than 25% cost of a line item is moving around. I'm sorry, if it's less than 10%, no, it was less than 25. This is the missing one. Then you do not need to amend. You can refer to that when you look at this document online. Now we're going to hop to number 5, which is to increase the salary amount of funds budgeted for a line item by 10% or less. Nope, you do not need to amend for the ESSA grant. Number 6, if you increase the salary amount of funds budgeted for a line item, meaning a position type, such as teacher, project director, or teacher's aide, by more than 10%. No, you do not need to do an amendment in that situation. Number 7, if you add a new line item on any of the supporting budget schedules, yes, you do need to amend. No matter how small of an item it is or how small of an amount of money, it could be $1 million grant, but if you are adding a $250 server and your capitalization threshold is so low that any piece of equipment has to be capitalized, yeah, you're going to have to add that because it wasn't on your budget before. Number 8, if you want to increase or decrease the number of payroll positions approved for a line item by 20% or less. No, you do not need to amend in that scenario. Number 9, if if you want to increase or decrease the number of payroll positions approved for a line item by more than 20%. Yes, you do need to amend in that scenario. Number 10, if you want to add a type of payroll position not initially approved. Yes, you have to amend. This is why we really do not like to hear the question, hey, if I'm moving less than 25% of my grant around, do I need to amend? I don't need to amend, do I? Well, we need to ask you way more questions. We need to ask you 14 questions to be precise to make sure that one of these specific situations is not in play. Next slide, please. Number 11, if you add a new item or increase the quantity of capital outlay items approved, and that's different than supplies and materials because all of your capital outlay items need to be specifically identified, a purpose has to be presented, and we need a specific quantity. So if you are changing the quantity of capital outlay items, yes, you do need to amend. Number 12 has to do with training. If you plan to reduce funds allotted for training costs, or such costs are direct payments or reimbursements to trainees, primarily travel and lodging for trainees, workshop or conference registration fees, tuition, books, and related fees. Yes, you will need to do an amendment in that scenario. Number 13, if you want to request additional funding as applicable to the grant, don't be thinking that you just get to ask for more money if you feel like it. TEA will tell you that additional funds are available, and they will ask you to submit an amendment to claim those funds and to budget those funds in the places you need them. That will be information you get from TEA, and then you will submit the amendment so that you can put the funds where you want to. And lastly, 14, if you revise the scope or objectives of the grant, regardless of whether there is an associated budget revision requiring prior approval, yes, you will need to amend. If after you've reviewed all the information we've provided for you on when to amend the application, you still have questions or your scenario is a little more detailed, please give a call to your negotiator and we will work with you on that. Next slide, please. Oh, it's somebody else. I'm all done. It's been my pleasure working with you today. See you later.
Thank you, Amy. So that concludes part 4 of the training.